Good morning. Welcome to the second module in the mobility track. My name is Patel Bushnell, and I am the Executive Director of the Independent Transportation Network. And as you know, we've been talking about alternatives and options for senior mobility, and ITN happens to be one of those that came to Massachusetts 3.5 years ago. It's a great summit. How is everybody feeling after having gone through some of the early sessions? Great. Excellent. Well, we are in between you and lunch, so we will do our very best to keep you very excitedly engaged with this session. Today, I'm delighted to have three very strong panelists with me. Lissa Kapust is going to be talking about the DriveWise program at Beth Israel, but a lot of her work has to do with a gold standard assessment program and how it has been working. Lissa is a clinical social worker, and we'll be hearing from her very soon. We'll also be hearing from John Paul, and John is head of PR for the AAA of Northeast, and he has a lot of advice and tools and techniques to help one really extend their safe driving duration. And with us also is Don Blackburn, and Don has been an executive for over 40 years, starting his career in New York City, and he's going to talk to us about the loss of independence when you can no longer drive. I think throughout the morning so far, one of the common themes that we've been seeing and learning is that transportation is a basic human need for anyone, any age. And it is so linked to one's sense of autonomy, purpose, and quality of life. And this particular session will help us understand the human factors, what is involved, the human emotions, and how we deal with those along the way. So I'm going to kick off by saying how very proud I am to have my three panelists, and let me once again introduce Lissa. So Lissa Kapust is a licensed social worker, and she's the founder and director of DriveWise, which is a nationally recognized program in the Department of Neurology at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. DriveWise is nationally recognized for its excellence in clinical care and research initiatives. It is considered the gold standard among assessment programs for individuals with medical problems for whom driving safety has been questioned. As a clinical social worker with over 35 years of experience in the academic teaching hospital, it is clear that the assessment of driving safety must integrate medical, cognitive, and social factors. Safe driving has enormous consequences for public safety and personal well-being, and it is my great honor to welcome Lissa to the podium at this stage. Lissa?
Well, today has been a day of personal challenges. I was on the phone late at night with Jean, obsessing about how I was going to get here, because while I'm at Beth Israel Deaconess, called the Queen of Driving, what I'll share with all of you is that I hate driving. I'm not a good driver. And one of my most, as it is for many people, I'm most compromised when I need to get somewhere. I'm anxious to start off with, which of course I was today, and I don't know where I'm going. Driving in this part of Boston, it's just not on my beat. And when yesterday afternoon I thought, well, I'll GPS this early on my very fancy GPS system, which is why I bought my very safe car, it wouldn't accept the address of UMass as 100 Morrissey Boulevard. I went back and forth thinking maybe it's really not called Morrissey Boulevard. And in the end, I thought, without my GPS, I'm not driving here. So I spent a kind of sleepless evening And this morning made the decision on a conversation with Jean that I had last night that I would drive to my hospital, and I know that route, been going there for 37 years, and I'd call a taxi. And I would get here with a taxi, not have to worry about getting lost, not getting here on time. And in fact, people are most vulnerable in the driving situation when they get lost. So that is a kind of screening question that you want to think about when you're working with older individuals or any individuals around assessment for driving. So driving and getting lost, number one fear. Number two fear is technology failure. So the overview is a little bit of an experiential exercise. The video, which really by the Alzheimer's Foundation Association, I think tells the story phenomenally. What are some of the strategies to having the conversation? Looking at the DriveWise program at Beth Israel Deaconess, 700 patients later, talking about the role of clinical social work in that program, because what I think distinguishes our program really from any of the other programs around is the key role of social work as bookends. You can't begin to mess with someone's capacity to drive unless you're going to build in the psychological, psychosocial, emotional piece. And I see heads nodding, and then thinking a little bit about future directions. But in terms of just an experiential exercise, in the meeting before this on the same track, there was a question raised about how many people had actually thought about a time that might come when their own driving ended. And there were a fair amount of hands. Again, with this group, how many people have really considered what they're going to do and maybe made some plans? Well, this is a pretty extraordinary group because, in fact, most people, as we know, kind of wait for the crisis and do their planning then. How many have had a difficult conversation with people you love about? So more people. And how many of us can even imagine being told by maybe our primary care doctors or a family member riding as a passenger with us that our driving is not what it used to be, maybe on the basis of arthritis or cardiac situation that causes periods where you get dizzy and may pass out without warning. How many people can imagine being told that we aren't safe to drive? And then really wrestling with that question, is driving a privilege or not? Is it a freedom that we just kind of take for granted, or is it really a privilege? So kind of getting into the mindset and moving from the intellect to kind of, well, the Yiddish expression is your kishkis, your gut. So move from your head to your gut, and let's think together about what it really means to be in the situation where the wheels fall off. And I love the name for this segment. Learning that you can't drive is truly the first major marker that life is irrevocably different, changed, and altered.
It's difficult telling someone that they have to give up driving. You know, they've driven for 50 years. They may have a spotless record, but now you know that they shouldn't be driving.
This is not an easy problem. No one wants to have Alzheimer's. No one wants to have to stop driving. No one wants to move into a nursing home. These are all challenges that are difficult.
What we know with someone who has a diagnosis of dementia, however, is that at some point they will no longer be safe to drive.
I mean, the phrase I frequently use is that it truly brings family members to their knees.
And that was really the first time in my whole life that I had to tell my daddy no. And, at 85, he's still my daddy.
There's really no one-size-fits-all solution to tackling that very difficult decision about driving cessation. There are times when family members can talk with someone who has Alzheimer's disease in the early stages, and they can resolve that on their own. And some people accept the news and understand it, and they're able to make adjustments. The type of program that we developed, DriveWise, is really suited to those situations where it's not as straightforward. It's not a slam dunk. It's not an easy decision for the family or the physician or the person who has Alzheimer's disease. And in that case, it requires a more extended conversation with objective data.
So with all of that in mind, I work with an interdisciplinary team. I talked with the team about launching an objective assessment program that would both have office-based testing and take patients on the road, which is what's known as the gold standard. And that was the early genesis of the DriveWise program back in the early 1990s. But I think the pieces that make our program unique are that we have clinical social workers as the bookends of the program. Clinical social work first meets with the patient and family to really do an assessment, to understand for that particular patient and family, what are the concerns? What's the role of driving in the patient's life? We have an occupational therapist who's specially trained in this field, and she does testing in the office, looking at brake reaction time, looking at vision, looking at how quickly, it's called speed of processing, how quickly does the patient integrate information.
Taking somebody out on the road can have a very important therapeutic impact. It tells us something, but even more important than that, it tells the person who's in the early stages of dementia, it gives them their day in court. It gives them feedback about how they're operating the vehicle. And taking the argument and the difficult conversation outside the family context and putting it on the DriveWise professionals is often very helpful.
The individual that you'll meet today is actually a man who, with the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, decided to come to the Boston area to be closer to family and to live in assisted living, where if there's a time that he can't drive, his transportation needs will be met.
My first driver's license was in Colorado, and my legs were so short, I was only 13 years old. I lied about my age, right? And I was sitting on an egg crate when the tester got in the car.
Yeah, okay.
And he was laughing so hard, I don't think he even noticed how I was driving.
Right.
In the back seat of the car is the occupational therapist, who the individual has gotten to know during the office-based testing. And that occupational therapist has a checklist, and she's really looking at probably 50 different maneuvers, skills, strategies. You know, how did they manage the speed of the car? Did they maintain lane position? How did they do with the stop signs? What was their judgment like during the course of the road test? So it's a 45-minute road test that has the occupational therapist in the back seat. Following all of that, our team meets, and every member on the team thinks about what's our recommendation going to be, and every recommendation is tailor-made for the specific patient. And then, of course, the final meeting with the social worker, where she's really looking at either the person is safe to drive or not safe to drive, and what kind of follow-up do we need in the community to locate alternative transportation resources. If the patient becomes severely depressed or has potential to become suicidal, even homicidal. We've had some patients who get so furious with their spouses that spouses become vulnerable in terms of violence. So we really need to think about kind of the domino effect of the news that we deliver, and we don't take it lightly. So I want to say congratulations.
Well, thank you.
This is good news. This is really a day to celebrate. So you did well, and we'll see you back in 6 months, and you can call us in between then if there's any change in your health status or any questions come up. But we really are delighted to give you this news.
I'm good. Thank you very much. The Alzheimer's drives me crazy, right? It really does. I will have a conversation with somebody. It really doesn't matter what we're talking about. And 3 or 4 hours later, somebody will ask me, hey, you were talking to Bill about this and that. I said, I was? It's gone. At 13, I started driving Pop's truck for the most part. He was my grandfather, and he would take me to work with him, and I would learn how to carpenter, right? And I would drive the truck periodically with him sitting beside me.
And he loved it. It gave him independence. And once he got a car, he was gone.
A 1948 Packard. The back doors, the 4-door, the back doors opened this way. I loved that car. You could put 3 couples in that back seat and they'd never knock knees together. It was great.
I think the program is important for a number of reasons. One, just the reassurance for Alan, for me, for everyone he may ride with, that in fact, his being on the road is a good thing and is still acceptable. We wanted to have that reassurance. Al told me at the time that the last thing he ever wanted to do was hurt anybody by being behind the wheel when he shouldn't be. So he was totally open to that.
And I went into this entire program with the idea firmly in mind that at some point, it's all going to change, and I'm not going to be able to do it anymore. That's where I am. I've accepted that.
So we know there is going to be an avalanche in terms of the population of people who will be identified as having Alzheimer's disease. And we also know at the same time that there's no cure yet. So our work is to try to do the best that we can to support independence, to support autonomy, to support a quality of life that is in some ways maybe satisfying, may not be optimal, but it's at least satisfying, while making sure that the person is safe and making sure that the person is not at risk of making decisions that could endanger them or others.
So what can we do proactively? Well, we can have the tough conversation at Beth Israel Deaconess, a Harvard teaching hospital, and I think in hospitals really around Boston and around the country, there's more and more push to having tough conversations, not so much about driving, but there's the ripple effect, but tough conversations that doctors are now being mandated to have around end-of-life issues. Have people been following Globe stories and letters to the editor and that whole business that, doctors want to maintain relationships with patients, and certainly talking about driving is something nobody wants to do. But we're hoping educationally to go around and give talks like we do to get doctors and other healthcare professionals involved with older individuals to get them to have these conversations. So hopefully before the crisis, some of the keys to having these conversations, have them often. Sometimes picking a key family member, it may not be the adult son, it may be Uncle Harry, who's had a great relationship with his brother, who might be a better person to have the conversation. There is thinking that you could actually add instructions to advance planning. And I think you have a guide on your table which references material that includes a guide sheet which says, I, Lissa Kapust, at my tender age now of 66, that if there's a time I can't drive, I really want to designate my doctors, my kids to make the decision for me. Do not let me drive. And it really can be a document that's included in your other financial legal planning. I talk about bite-sized pieces of reality. It's good to kind of present things in bite-sized pieces so you don't overwhelm a person on the other end, which may begin to say, I wonder, if you, how safe you feel as a driver. Could I take a drive with you so that together we can see how things look? And in the earlier session here, people talked about you don't necessarily have to fall off the cliff in one step. How can you gradually say, don't drive at night, don't drive to areas like UMass where there's construction, delays, detours, and you'll just get confused. How can you use public transportation or get rides or do other things? And involve healthcare professionals in some of these conversations if they're willing to be. 17 years directing the DriveWise program, what I know for sure is that nobody wants to be the bad guy, and that's family, friends, neighbors, and physicians. So the DriveWise program developed at Beth Israel Deaconess, and it began with an article, my first article. I looked back at the date, 1992, kind of the dark ages of thinking about driving and programs. But week after week, we would sit in case conferences in the memory disorders clinic where I worked and work, thinking about who's safe to drive, because that came up as the issue time and time again. That really was, doctors would shrug their shoulders, say, how can you really know in the office visit? Family members may underreport or overreport. You can't really trust their reports. So I wrote this paper comparing two people with similar neurocognitive profiles, and it was really the road test that gave us the information as to whether or not they were safe to drive or not. I should mention that I'd been interviewed, Nina, I don't know if some other people here have as well, by a reporter for the Boston Globe who I think her article may be out today to correspond with today's conference on the whole issue of driving and elderly driving and to drive or not to drive. And she interviewed me for hours and took about a line or two. But she did take a key line, and it's a line that it's the pull line because it's so powerful. And if you've heard me talk before, you've heard me use it, but it's true. This is the issue that brings family members to their knees. There is nothing as powerful as trying to decide if somebody you care about is safe to drive. So my career moved forward when I was interviewed by national news after the California farmers market crash. Who here remembers that? So that was dramatic, and that really kicked off the age of yellow journalism where, after that, anytime any older person was involved in a crash, it was headline news. But this was really unfortunate. 86-year-old man, neighbors had noticed dings on his car. He couldn't back out of his driveway well, but nobody really wanted to be the bad guy. So he mixed up the accelerator and the brake, claimed it was the automobile, but we all know that it's driver error, not usually the car. 10 people were killed, over 70 people injured, and he was actually found criminally negligent. They ended up not sending this 86-year-old man to jail, but nonetheless, it was just an awful story. So these are the demographics of our population. You'll see that we have a fair amount of, the chunk of our drivers are between the 80 to 84-year-old group, 19%, similar group, 75 to 79. But look at our 90 to 94-year-old group. I have kind of an interesting story that I'll tell you in a moment about them. The other take-home message is that driving fitness really is not determined by medical diagnosis alone or by age alone. Boy, have we learned that. We've had people truly surprise us. It is a case-by-case assessment, which is why I think our hospital-based program pays such attention to that and does such a careful job. So our program has been called the gold standard. We have an on-road portion to our assessment, which is critical. We have the interdisciplinary team working together to make the judgment as to whether someone is safe or not. And then we have the supportive interventions by social work to really understand how are the domino pieces going to fall down if this person is no longer driving. If you're the driver that, as one of our women that was filmed in a TV show that we did. She lived in East Boston, was in her mid-80s. She took everybody to Mass at noontime in her neighborhood. So what's the domino effect when she's no longer driving everyone to Mass? Our program has a big research and educational component in addition to the clinical practice. This is just a schematic of what happens. People come in, they're referred. Social work meets with them. Occupational therapy does a office-based assessment. And then the road evaluation, where there's a driving instructor in the front seat with the patient driving, and the instructor has an emergency set of brakes. And our occupational therapist is in the back seat checking off many, many items that then helps us formulate the recommendations. We have a team meeting. Sometimes we yell and fight and cry and wring our hands because we don't all see the same outcome. But eventually we have to get to a recommendation, which we do, and that's shared with the patient and family at a feedback meeting. So the social work role is reviewing our consent form. We do report to the Registry of Motor Vehicles in the case of patients who we find to be unsafe. And when we deliver this news, they basically tell us to take a hike, that they have no interest in following our advice. And at that point, we have the duty to warn, which our hospital attorneys told us we really had to put forward, and we will contact the registry and share our concerns with them. Who can report? Well, anybody can report. In this state, there's no legal requirement of reporting. Social work evaluation looks at the history. What's the meaning of driving in the context for this person of losses? What other losses are they having? And to try to anticipate if they can no longer drive, what's the impact going to be? Is it going to be the ice cream cone, or is it going to be that they can no longer get to work? Somebody showed a slide earlier about going to the gravesite. We had one man who we filmed who said he goes to visit his wife's grave every day. Think about the impact of taking that away. Some of the voices of our patients, you can't make this stuff up. This is true. It was easier to learn I had cancer than to hear that I couldn't drive. This is a pot of crock. I'm not going to stop driving. Well, that would be a case where we probably connect with our friends at the medical affairs in the registry. I survived Nazi Germany. Not driving is going to prison. Think of the punch of this woman who said, I am a survivor. How can you basically put me in prison, which is what she thought it would be. We've developed assessment tools as part of our research. This is one that we use. It's kind of a fancy tool, but any of you, if you are working with older individuals, can embrace some of these. Take a crash history. And not only is it how many crashes have you been in, but how many close calls? What does that car look like? Is the rear view mirror hanging off on a thread? No, the side view mirror hanging off on a thread? The other key issue is family concern. Talk to them. Wonder how worried they are. And then the clinical status, basically, what's the overall health of the individual, and the cognition, which clearly plays a role, but may not be the key role. Members of our team, I'm going to kind of move through this quickly because you've heard about them. The outcomes could be that a person's safe to return to driving. For some people, we think that maybe somebody recovering from a stroke does have some problems. Maybe they're not maintaining lane as well as we think they could, or not keeping speed up. The older driver is not the race car driver. They're not the speed demons. They may be the slower driver, but can also be a victim of really road rage, because who likes the Sunday driver, the older driver in front of them? So remediation and retesting is an option, or that we tell the person that they're unsafe to drive. 6-month follow-up for everybody with progressive disease. And again, our evaluation is really just a snapshot. Breaking bad news. I have trainees in my program. This is the hardest thing that they have to do. It's a good day when we're able to tell somebody that we found them safe to drive. You walk into work feeling like there's a knot in your stomach when you have to break bad news. And there really are some techniques listed out here that you can use. Most important is defining independence broadly. It's more than the piece of plastic in your wallet. And also focusing on resilience, other times in their life when they've come through hard times. Warning signs for unsafe driving. The left-hand turns are definitely a problem. Problems merging, running up on curbs, getting lost. The literature really supports that driving while lost is just not a good state. Future directions, you'll be hearing about those later in the day, but some of the big concepts are better signs, bigger signs, lighted signs, using wider striping. The video that you didn't see talks about the use of the silver alert in Florida. I don't know if other states are using this as well, but this borrowed from the Amber Alert. So if you have a older person who's gone missing while driving, silver alerts flash up and hopefully find that individual. I borrowed from Paul Rea's habilitative model, and I thought about, for driving, why not have well-being driver habilitation, which includes the items that I've listed here. One of the items that should be here is sleep, because what we know more and more, not just for older drivers who are having problems, for any of us, drowsy drivers, not good. And for the older driver, maybe taking medication that's making them sleepy, or that other lifestyle problems, they're just not sleeping well. You don't want them driving drowsy. And then car habilitation. I think maybe AAA will talk about this a little bit more. But the car has to be maintained. Use seatbelts, avoid distractions. Some of the technology you'll hear about, watch out, because it may be helpful, but it may be distracting. So here's what our patients have taught us: the value of resilience. Their stories are amazing. And even when we think we're delivering the worst news in the worst circumstances, we'll get letters back from family members saying, you know, my husband really developed other ways of managing his transportation needs. It was awesome to see how resilient he could be, and how friends and neighbors and use of volunteer services. I keep the independent transportation network. You're on my fast dial. I mean, those volunteer driving agencies are just life-saving. There's no slam dunk in trying to decide who's safe to drive and who isn't. It's patient by patient, individual assessment, one at a time. Remediation can make a difference for some people, and subjectivity in the exam is built in. How hard is it to tell somebody that could be your grandfather that they can't drive? Take-home message: most of us will outlive our driving fitness by 7 to 10 years. So most of us aren't going to drive until we die. So what's that 7 to 10 year period going to look like? And how will you plan? So 2 cartoons, which I just happen to like. I was complimented on my driving the other day. How? Well, there was a note on my windshield. It said, parking fine, which was nice. And then the other one is, it's time. How do you know when it's time to hang up the keys? I say when your dog has this look on his face. So thank you for your attention.
We want to introduce our second contributor to this wonderful module, and it's John Paul. And John Paul is the Senior Manager of Public Affairs and Traffic Safety Advocacy at the AAA of the Northeast. One of the ways you recognize John Paul is because he's the car doctor on the radio program each Saturday on WROL radio. And his emphasis today is going to talk about how we elongate the years of safe driving and what are some of the techniques that one can utilize. Thank you very much, John.
Well, thank you. I don't have a PowerPoint, so I don't have to worry about technology being in the way. As Jean said, one of the things I do as part of what we do at AAA, we go out to the public a lot. We talk to a lot of different groups. And one of the brochures that I left on the table was the Older and Wiser Driver brochure. It's a stock AAA brochure we use a lot. We have a couple of AAA representatives here. Diana, wave, and from Northern New England, Pat Moody. And but we provide a lot of information to our members and non-members alike in some cases when we go out to the public, and really try to talk about things to try to extend safe driving. We keep hearing about how people are going to outlive their safe driving ability by 6 to 10 years. We keep hearing about how as people start to think about planning for their non-driving years, Lissa said one of the things she hates doing more than anything is driving. One of the things I like doing just about more than anything is driving. as part of my as part of my job, one of the things is I review new cars. I write about cars. I drive 50 or so different cars a year. So I drive a lot of different cars, and I experience how some cars are better than others. And we try to really help people when we go out and talk. And, you know, some of them are very simple things. When we look at seniors and how they age, we talk about tailgating sometimes and leaving plenty of room between you and the car in front of you. So as your reaction time's slow, you have that opportunity to react to things. You know, a lot of times when I go out and talk to a group of, a room full of people like this that happens to be seniors, and say to them, how many people learned when you took any kind of driving lesson, leave 1 car length of space for every 10 miles an hour? And all the hands go up. I said, well, that's actually wrong. You want to leave a lot more space than that. And we tell them to do it in seconds. So we tell them, wait until the car in front of them goes by a fixed object. It should take you 3 or 4 seconds before you get to that same object. It takes about a half a second to a second to realize something happened in front of you, another half a second to a second to get your foot off the gas and step on the brake. So if it's going to take you a couple of seconds to react, you need to make sure you have plenty of time to do that. The other thing is we try to teach people whenever they have their eyes off the road, always get their foot up over the brake pedal. That way they're going to be able to react a little bit quicker, because as they're going into the parking lot, they're looking for that parking space. When they don't have their eyes directly on the road in front of them, have their foot over the brake pedal. That way, if they do need to stop in a hurry, they're going to save that half a second or a second of reaction time. And that's the difference between a collision and one that didn't happen. The left turn lane, we hear about that constantly, that left turn lanes are dangerous. So we try to tell people, when you can, make 3 right turns instead of that left turn. And I think it was FedEx or UPS, one of those companies, whenever possible, tried to take left turns out of their routes. And they did it for 2 reasons. They found out by sitting, waiting to turn left, they're wasting fuel. And then they also found out, as they were saving fuel, the collision rates went down. So we try to tell people, whenever possible, try to take those 3 right turns instead of the left. It's a safer thing to do. Then also we look at the people themselves. Very often, and probably my life will reflect this, is when my wife and I go out, I typically always drive. And that's what we hear from seniors all the time, is the wife typically doesn't drive that much. And at some point, if my safe driving ability starts to come into question, hopefully my wife, and hopefully I'll accept it enough to say, well, why don't you drive? And maybe, hopefully she'll volunteer to do that. But we hear that a lot from people when we talk to seniors sometimes, and somebody will say, I really can't have that conversation with my husband. And I'll go, well, how come? And it's been like, well, we've been married for 50 years. For 50 years, whenever we went out, he always drove. And I know that if I tell him he shouldn't drive, it'll break his heart. And we hear those conversations all the time. And that's something that, you know, as professionals who go out and talk, we need to remind people to think about those kind of things. So, again, we have a lot of tools available through AAA's website at seniordriving.aaa.com. And there's evaluation tools and a variety of different things. But even, you know, part of my job at AAA is we talk about a lot about traffic safety, but like Gene said, I'm also AAA's car doctor. What does that mean? I write columns for the AAA publication Horizons, but also for the Boston Globe on Saturdays and the Providence Journal and a couple other ones. And I wanted to share an email that I got today. And it says, I'm a senior in my late 70s and I want and need to buy a new car. A car with many safety features I think will help me be as independent for as long as possible. There are so many new safety features in various cars, and I'm wondering if there is a car with all or most of the features listed below. This person in his 70s is looking for a car with lane departure and forward collision warning systems, a heated steering wheel, backup camera with alerts, blind spot detection system. He's also looking for a car with all-wheel drive, Bluetooth, good visibility, and easy accents and ABS brakes. So this is somebody in their late 70s, and they want to continue driving. And we hear from people a fair amount of time about just those kind of concerns. Is there a car that will make me a safer driver for a longer period of time? And that's sort of our saying at AAA, safer longer. We want to try to keep, we don't want to limit people in their driving if they can do it if they can find a way to be safer. And there are so many simple things like I said, leaving a good following distance between you and the cars around you. Sitting up. I mean, let's face it. We all as we age get shorter. When you wake up in the morning, you're taller than you are when you go to bed at night. It's a kind of natural thing. So as we age, we tend to get shorter, and we try to tell people, don't be shy about sitting up on a cushion where you can get a little bit better view on the road. Find a car that's easier to get in and out of sometimes. And there's some small SUVs, especially the subcompact version of SUVs now, are easy to get in and out of for older people. Now all of a sudden they're also sitting up a little bit higher. They're getting a better view of the road. So somebody who might have traded something like a Ford Taurus or Crown Victoria, something they've been driving for a long time, a new small SUV like the Honda HHR or a Buick Encore or something like that might actually be a better choice for a driver as they're starting to age a little bit. So those are things that can sometimes really try to help. So the design of the car can help a lot. Kind of looking at your own driving experience, but also trying to tell people there is some hope. And then the next step, of course, is when you just can't drive anymore. And I was fortunate. My mother is 91 years old. About a year ago, she had to give up driving. She probably should have given up driving 2 years before that. But like all sons, I'm afraid of my mother still at 91 years old. And, we would have this conversation about, Ma, I noticed, this little broken light in the front. In fact, one day I took her car and I happened to notice the left front turn signal was broken. So I fixed it and brought it back. And she said to me a couple days later, what'd you do to my car? And I said, I noticed the front turn signal was broken. I fixed it. And I said, how'd that happen? Or actually, I thought it was, I had the car. I had it at a post office, so I thought it happened. And she said, oh, no, I hit somebody, but it really didn't do any damage, so I didn't mention anything. Like, well, we probably should think about that. The fortunate part was, and how I guess I was somewhat blessed, there was a windy spring day about a year ago, and while her car was in the driveway, a tree fell on it. Hit it right in the middle of the roof, totaled the car. And at 90 years old, she's like, I guess I don't really need to think about buying another car. Although I will say that when she called me up, she said, can you stop by the house? A branch fell on my car. Well, it was more than a branch, it was a whole tree. And she blamed the neighbor for cutting some other trees down, which made it windier in her yard. And, but mentally, my mother is much sharper than I am. She reads constantly, but physically she had some problems. And I was fortunate that this tree fell on the car, and I just said, no, I think pretty much the car's over. Call your insurance company. And she did, and she called me up. Yeah, the car's total. And that was the end of the conversation. Are you sure you didn't stage it? No, I know. I was. She may have thought that too, but no. It was the downside of all this is that now. Back up a little bit. I've been married for a really long time, for 40 years, just about. My wife she worked at a supermarket, so I've never been to a supermarket. I think once I went to a supermarket to buy firewood. It was the only time I've ever been to a supermarket. Now I go to the supermarket at least once a week for my mother. And so by her not having a car, all of a sudden now I'm either, like we learned before, a volunteer driver, or I'm just a delivery person. I'm picking up different things during the week and making sure she's okay, because she has lost that. And even though she lives in Brockton, which has a transportation system, she's only used it a couple of times. She doesn't really like it. She likes it better if I go find her groceries for her. So it has become a little bit of a challenge, I suppose, especially if I'm away for a week or so. I have to make sure I kind of double up. But again, look at some of the tools that are available. Seniordriving.aaa.com is a good start for that. There are some simple tips that you can find on there to try to extend a senior's safe driving practice. And And then at some point, you need to consider what happens after that. And I think that's it. Okay. Yes. CarFit is all part of that. CarFit is a program that we don't do a lot of, but we incorporate a lot of CarFit. CarFit, for people who don't know, it's a way that people can look at how they fit in their own car, look at some different things. It's done in conjunction with occupational therapists and AARP. We use a lot of the CarFit information in programs that we do. We have a simple 1-hour program. We call it the Older and Wiser and Driver that will come out and talk to groups. And we have a longer program called AAA's Roadwise program, which is it can be 4, 6, or even 8 hours if we want it to be. So we'll come out and we incorporate a lot of that into those programs. And again, online you can find Roadwise Review, which is an online evaluation, Roadwise RX, which is a great program that allows people to put in all their medication and see how and what it looks at is specifically about driving reactions. So there's some things that look pretty benign when you first put them in, but if you combine it with a couple other drugs, all of a sudden there can be some driving issues that pop up. So again, easy programs for people to use. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Don. Thank you. I saw a lot of note-taking, so I'm sure lots of tips have been picked up. I have to beg of your indulgence because we are running a little bit over, and I know again that I'm in between lunch and this session, but it's very important that we listen to our last participant in this module, who is Don Blackburn. Don, for 40 years, has been a business executive, and about a year or so ago, he had to give up driving. And we all know from all the sessions we've been attending thus far how emotional a decision this is. And Don will share with us the loss of control that he felt, even though he has a very supportive structure around him. Don Blackburn, we welcome you to the podium.
Thank you. I know it's getting the bewitching hour, so I'll try to make it as brief as I can. And I'll skip over what I was going to say about my background. It's needless to say, I've served as an executive in many companies, and I retired as vice president of a company that was a manufacturer of magnetic tape. I'm an expert in magnetic tape. I'm an expert in hard drive destructions and things like that, okay? But anyway, after I retired, a good friend of mine who owns a company down in Manassas, Virginia, asked if I wanted to join the company. And I said, sure, I'll join you, because he knows my experience. And what I did was I took up a position of being an independent contractor with my function being director of sales, okay, for a company down in, well, I live in Attleboro. I live in Framingham. I was born in Attleboro. And how can I do this? Well, I have a computer, I have a telephone, and I do it through distributors. And the reason I can do that is because they can't see me and I don't have to see them, okay? Because I hate to say it, but I know I'm the oldest person in this room, okay? I think I'm probably twice as old as some of the people in this room. And in fact, I'm not 100% sure I'm not the oldest person in this building right now. But that's okay. But let me give you a few things, because giving up your ability to drive is not an easy thing to do, okay? So what I'm going to first do, I'm going to give you some pretty compelling arguments of why I should drive, all right? First of all, when I found out that cardiac rehab might help, I found myself in a room full of nurses and a lot of equipment which looked to me like instruments of torture. It was difficult at the beginning, but then I got in the swing of it, and by the end of many sessions, I was doing like 12 minutes on 4 different things in 48 minutes. So, I did 48 minutes in an hour. So I thought it was pretty good, So one of my first argument is, if I could do this in rehab, why can't I drive, The other thing was that I am working now as a sales director, and I've got a lot of responsibilities, and I find it very easy because of my experience. And again, as I said, I work through distributors. well, if that's true, why can't I drive my automobile, you know? The third argument that I would have is it's a no-brainer. I don't want to give up my independence, period, okay? So anyway, Jean asked me if I could speak, and I started thinking about myself. You know, I looked in the mirror one day, and I saw this old guy staring back at me, and I turned around and said, who in the world is that, you know? I said, could age make a difference? I don't know. But anyway, there were two conversations that I had. The first was with my cardiac nurse. I said to Pat, I don't know what's normal, but this isn't normal. And she looked me right in the eyes and said, I don't want to insult you, Mr. Blackburn. She says, but you're no longer a 40-year-old man. Wow, what a perfect squelch that was, you know. Phew. The other one came directly from a cardiologist. He finished examining me, and he said, hey, everything's okay. I said, well, if everything's okay, then why can't I drive my automobile? And he says, oh, you can drive the automobile, but he said, but was the equivalent of the descending of the guillotine for me, okay? He says, but there are other considerations. And I said to myself, well, wait a minute. I feel healthy enough. I'm reasonably sharp. What could it be, you know? Now, what I did was I took out of my consciousness the fact that perhaps it was my reaction time. You know, for a while I thought Lissa and Paul were talking about me, you know. Not all of it, but some of it, but anyway. Anyway, what I did was I started thinking about myself, and I said, no, wait a minute. If I'm on the Mass Turnpike going 70 miles an hour, will I switch lanes without looking? Will I forget to use the directionals? If that car in front of me braked, would I have enough time to stop, okay? I mean, these things are important, you know, and that's part of the but that the cardiologist said, you know, this what ifs can be an awful long list of things to say, you know, like your age, your hearing, your eyes, your vision, everything else comes into play. And it's a very, very difficult thing to give up. And I finally convinced myself that if I can't be honest with myself, then I have no reason, I really don't deserve the keys, okay? So I gave up my keys in my car, all right? But I can say one thing, that not a day goes by, not a day goes by that I don't want to drive that automobile, okay? But at least now I know that I'm not going to hurt anybody and just to soothe my ego by getting behind the wheel of an automobile. But it's a very difficult thing to do, and yes, I could talk all day about arguments of why and how the children reacted and all that sort of stuff, you know, and I still zing them every so often. But the right thing to do is to have a person understand themselves that they have to give it up and not force them to do it. Okay? Thank you.